Two engines, same displacement, same legendary number, but this time, zero coincidence in the naming. 572 cubic inches, 9.4 liters of American displacement excess that both Chevrolet and Ford arrived at through completely opposite philosophies. This wasn't like the accidental 302 twins. This was deliberate. Both manufacturers targeting the same magic number with radically different visions of what a 572 should be. Chevrolet's 572 came from the catalog. A crate engine you could order from Summit Racing, bolt into your project, and drive to work the next day, factory warranty included. GM Performance Parts built thousands of them, selling the dream of 620 horsepower to anyone with a credit card and a vehicle capable of containing that much violence. Ford's 572 Boss Hemi came from Legend, a limited production NASCAR homologation special hand-built at the mysterious crankshaft facility, barely street legal and completely impractical production numbers disputed to this day. Survival rate? Abysmal. These weren't sold, they were allocated grudgingly to customers Ford deemed worthy. How did two manufacturers build 572 cubic inch monsters with such opposite approaches? Which philosophy actually won? Accessible power that thousands enjoyed, or exclusive mystique that became priceless? The answer reveals everything about American performance culture. Sometimes the best engine is the one you can actually buy, and sometimes the best story is the engine you'll never own. Historical context and development. The Chevy 572 emerged from GM Performance Parts in the early 1990s as a response to market demand that wouldn't quit. Hot rodders kept asking, what's bigger than the 454? What's the maximum streetable big block? Engineers at GM looked at the Mark IV architecture and calculated how far they could push before the block cracked or reality intervened. The answer was 4.560-inch bore and 4.375-inch stroke, creating exactly 572 cubic inches, the largest displacement that legendary iron block could reliably handle. This was designed as a crate engine from conception, complete, ready to install, backed by factory warranty. The target market wasn't NASCAR or professional racing, it was weekend warriors, muscle car restorers, street racers, and anyone who wanted maximum cubic inches without custom machine work. Part numbers proliferated: ZZ572, RAMJET variations, Marine versions, but the core concept remained constant: maximum displacement, maximum power, maximum availability. Price points settled around $10,000 to $15,000 complete, which sounds expensive until you calculate dollars per horsepower and realize it's a bargain. Ford's 572 Boss Hemi told a completely different story. Between 1968 and 1969, NASCAR's changing rules and Ford's desperation to compete with Chrysler's Hemi dominance created the Boss 429 program. The 572 variant was essentially the Boss 429 bored and stroked to maximum dimensions: 4.900-inch bore, 3.980-inch stroke, creating 572 cubic inches of single overhead cam complexity. Production numbers remain disputed. Estimates range from 500 to 900 total units, with exact figures lost to history or deliberately obscured. These engines were hand-assembled at crankshaft, Ford's semi-secret special vehicles facility in Brighton, Michigan. Street versions were heavily detuned and barely drivable, choked by emissions equipment and compromised by the need to pass some semblance of civilized behavior. Race versions produced 700-plus horsepower and lived at RPM ranges that destroyed components regularly. The philosophy was singular: win NASCAR homologation, make street legality secondary. If customers struggled to live with them, that was the price of owning racing exotica. The golden age. The Chevy 572's dominance spanned decades rather than years. The ZZ 572/620 became the standard bearer, advertised at 620 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. with actual dyno numbers often settling around 580 to 600 horses, depending on how the testing was conducted. These figures were still incredible for a naturally aspirated engine you could order from a catalog. The applications list read like a "what can we stuff a massive engine into" competition. Hot rods, muscle car restorations, street trucks, boats, pulling tractors, pro street builds, bracket racing, nostalgia dragsters. Marine applications particularly loved twin 572 setups in go-fast boats. Off-road enthusiasts wedged them into sandrails, rock crawlers, and trophy trucks. The engine sold thousands of units across decades and remains in GM Performance's catalog today, a testament to sustained demand. It became the LS swap equivalent of the big block era, the default answer when someone asked what engine to use. At roughly $10 to $15 per horsepower, the value proposition was impossible to ignore. Ford's 572 Boss Hemi lived an entirely different existence. Its NASCAR career achieved limited success before rules changed again, leaving Ford's development investment stranded. Street versions became instant collector items, installed primarily in Torino Talladega and Cyclone Spoiler 2 homologation specials. The rated output of 375 horsepower for street versions was comically conservative. These engines were heavily detuned and choked to meet emissions, representing a fraction of their racing potential. Race versions delivered estimated 15 to 20 horsepower per cubic inch in proper trim, but those specifications remained largely theoretical for street owners. The engines were too complex, too temperamental, and too expensive to maintain. Most owners discovered that reality quickly and converted back to more reliable 429 engines, killing the 572's originality but gaining drivability. The survival rate became abysmal. What should have been Ford's NASCAR weapon arrived too late, as sanctioning body rule changes for 1970 eliminated the advantages Ford had spent millions developing. Technical brilliance. The Chevy 572 Mark IV represented conventional architecture pushed to maximum potential. That 4.560-inch bore and 4.375-inch stroke operated within a cast-iron tall deck, Mark IV block, that had proven itself across millions of miles in various displacements. Aluminum heads came in oval port and rectangular port versions depending on application goals. A hydraulic roller camshaft provided streetable characteristics. No valve adjustments, reasonable idle quality, drivable power band. Compression settled at 9.6 to 1. Pump gas friendly in an era when premium fuel meant 91 to 93 octane. A single Holley 4-barrel carburetor handled induction duties. The reciprocating assembly featured forged pistons, forged crankshaft, and I-beam connecting rods, serious components but nothing exotic. Peak power arrived between 5,800 and 6,200 RPM, with torque creating a massive flat curve from 3,500 to 5,500 RPM that made the engine tractable and usable. Complete weight came in around 750 pounds. The valve train used traditional pushrod architecture that any mechanic understood. Everything was designed for reliability and street use, not maximum performance regardless of consequences. Ford's 572 Boss Hemi embodied exotic complexity. The same displacement came from 4.900-inch bore and 3.980-inch stroke, operating in a modified 385 series cast iron block. But the similarities ended there. Hemispherical combustion chambers with canted valves required single overhead camshafts on each bank. The valve gear was mechanical artwork, canted valves creating optimal combustion chamber shape while requiring exotic rocker arm geometry and specialized adjustment procedures. Peak power arrived between 6,000 and 7,000 RPM in race trim, with the engine willing to rev further if components survived. Complete weight exceeded 800 pounds, heavier than the Chevy despite similar displacement. Every engine was hand-assembled at Carcraft by technicians who understood that these weren't production engines, but barely civilized race motors with VIN numbers. They were designed to win NASCAR races, with street adaptation being an unfortunate regulatory requirement rather than a design goal. Challenges rise. The Chevy 572's problems were manageable inconveniences rather than fundamental failures. Weight became an immediate issue. 750-plus pounds of engine created packaging and handling challenges. Fuel economy was predictably terrible, 6 to 8 miles per gallon if driven gently. Worse under any spirited use, cooling systems required serious upgrades, with stock radiators utterly inadequate. Transmissions needed building. A TH400 was minimum, and even that required internal strengthening. Rear axles from factory vehicles couldn't handle the torque without immediate destruction. Hood clearance eliminated stock appearance on most applications. Emissions compliance was impossible in states with testing requirements. The supporting modifications, transmission, rear end, cooling, fuel system, exhaust, often exceeded the engine's cost. The 572 was overkill for most applications, delivering power that traction and chassis limitations couldn't effectively use, but the engine itself remained incredibly reliable and well supported by massive aftermarket infrastructure. Ford's 572 Boss Hemi faced existential disasters rather than manageable problems. The complexity required specialty tools for routine maintenance that most owners didn't have and couldn't obtain. Parts availability was non-existent for street owners, with Ford's parts bin offering little help for hand-built exotic components. Reliability was catastrophic. Failures weren't occasional, they were expected. Valve train components failed regularly, with cam towers cracking under stress. Oiling system starvation at high RPM destroyed bearings. Pump gas created detonation that killed pistons. Legacy and modern reality. Today, the Chevy 572 remains a living, breathing product line. GM Performance still manufactures them, with current versions offering 720-plus horsepower. Prices range from $13,000 to $20,000 depending on specification level. Expensive, but representing similar value per horsepower as 30 years ago when accounting for inflation. The massive aftermarket supplies everything imaginable. Rebuild kits cost $2,000 to $4,000, making maintenance economical relative to the performance delivered. You can still walk into a dealership and order a brand new 572, a remarkable statement about sustained demand and production viability. The engines continue powering modern hot rods, restorations, marine applications, and off-road vehicles. Modern EFI versions bring fuel injection sophistication to the classic big block platform. Proven examples accumulate hundreds of thousands of miles with proper maintenance, validating the design's fundamental soundness. The 572 refuses to die because it continues fulfilling its original mission, providing maximum displacement and power to anyone willing to handle the consequences. Ford's 572 Boss Hemi exists in a completely different reality. Original engines command $50,000 to $100,000 plus when they surface, assuming authenticity can be verified. Complete Boss 429 cars equipped with 572 engines bring $200,000 to $400,000 at auction. Investment-grade collectibles rather than usable vehicles. The authenticity problem is severe. Most engines claimed as 572s are actually 429s, mislabeled or wishfully identified. True 572 survivors number perhaps 100 to 200 units with exact counts impossible to verify. Parts reproduction has begun appearing for desperate restorers, but costs are astronomical. Complete restoration requires $30,000 to $50,000 and specialist knowledge that's increasingly rare as mechanics who worked on these engines originally retire or die. Nobody actually drives them. They're too valuable and too fragile. They've become trailer queens and museum pieces, admired but not used. The investment value means owners can't risk the mechanical failures that were common even when new. 2572s, one reality. The everyman's crate engine that anyone could buy versus the exotic Hemi that barely existed. One won through volume, the other through scarcity. Which would you choose? Affordable power or priceless legend? Subscribe and let's debate cubic inches.